Hi, fantasy readers. This is Karyne Norton, your fellow book binger, and you are listening to the Finding Fantasy Reads podcast, where you can test out a new fantasy story every single week to find your next favorite author. You'll want to stick around for today's story if you like romantasy retellings, more specifically, Beauty and the Beast. It's a longer one than almost every other story we've featured, so it's broken up into 3 parts. But I think you'll agree it's worth it, because if you like romantasies, you're probably already familiar with today's featured author, Tara Grayce. Tara writes romantic fantasy filled with lots of humor, spunky leading ladies, and broken heroes. She is a lifelong fantasy geek with a growing collection of swords, a few cosplay costumes in her closet, and a Narnia-themed guest bedroom, aka Spare Oom. Stick around to the end or check out today's show notes to see where you can find more from Tara, as well as how to enter our newest giveaway. For now, please enjoy Torn Curtains, Part 1 by Tara Grayce. Chapter 1. On how I came to the Beast's estate. My destiny started with curtains. Torn curtains. They weren't even nice curtains, some horrible rose pattern and heavy brocade, before my father tore them down. I'm not sure why he thought they would make a good dress, since they didn't even make nice draperies. Perhaps it had something to do with him getting roses for his Rose, the nickname my mother had always used for me, instead of my full name of Rosalie. How I ended up at Downshead Hall with the Beast doesn't really matter. What mattered was in the middle of summer, I found myself dropped off by a hired coach on the front steps of the country estate at the edge of the South Downs. The Beast, the once fashionably young and handsome James Enton, Earl of Warnwick, now struck down by this transformation spell, blinked his yellow protruding eyes at me, his fangs visible as his mouth gaped open. His black-tipped mane frizzed around his head and puffed out of the neck of his fashionable waistcoat and cravat, though the knot at the base of his leonine throat was lopsided. Under his waistcoat, he wore a white, ruffled shirt and black breeches over his tan-furred limbs, though his clawed feet, paws really, stuck out from the breeches without proper shoes or stockings. Horridly improper. But as he was stuck in the form of a beast until an end to the spell could be found, I doubted propriety could speak too harshly against him. I might have been more scared, standing there on the sparkling, white-pebbled drive, if he hadn't looked so disheveled and befuddled.
"What are you doing here?"
The Beast, Lord Warnwick, blinked again, his voice growling deep in his chest. As I said, I'm here to repay the curtains. I smoothed a hand over my skirt, only to halt the gesture when I realized that might draw attention to the fact that my overskirt and bodice were made from said curtains. I hadn't been given a chance to change into something more suitable and probably less offensive to his affronted sensibilities when my father had bundled me into the hired coach. I'm willing to work off the debt he owes.
"All I wanted was a couple of pence. Those curtains weren't worth much. I was planning on replacing them anyway."
Lord Warnwick growled and shook his mane. Very well, I can work for today if that is satisfactory. I kept my tone crisp, professional.
"Yes, no."
Lord Warnwick ran his clawed fingers, paw, through his mane. His gaze swept over me in my rose curtain dress.
"How desperate is your family, Miss Clampton?"
I stiffened at the use of my name. I'd known Lord Warnwick had figured out who Father was. He had to in order to send us the message in Portsmouth asking for payment for the curtains. But I'd hoped to avoid mention of our circumstances. So far, I'd managed to keep our personal scandal as quiet as possible, to prevent it hurting my sister's chances of debut. But their chances were ruined anyway at this point. Besides, if anyone deserved an explanation, Lord Warnwick did. He had been injured by my family, and as our superior in both rank and connections, he could demand a full revelation. Still, it wasn't decorous to discuss such matters on the front step. I drew my posture straighter. May we step inside to discuss this? Lord Warnwick snapped his mouth shut, though that didn't hide the tips of his fangs.
"My apologies, Miss Clampton. Of course. Please step this way."
As he opened the door for me, I tried to keep my face impassive. He was an earl, yet he'd just held the door himself, and he'd met me on the front step, as his butler should have done. Where were the servants? I peered around the dark foyer, catching sight of spider webs in the corners and dust on the picture frames. Lord Warnwick flapped one of his paws toward me.
"Wait here."
He stalked down a corridor and turned the corner. Even though he was out of sight, his bellow came clearly back toward me.
"Mrs. Dentley, a guest. Bring tea to the Rose Room."
I shifted on the rug, doing my level best to pretend not to hear. There should have been a footman or a maid standing by to carry out his instructions, but except for the elusive Mrs. Dentley, I'd seen no sign of the staff. Lord Warnwick led me down the hall and pushed open the door to a parlor. Wide windows overlooked Downshead Hall's rolling parkland. 3 of the windows wore their thick rose draperies that matched my dress, while the 4th was conspicuously missing its curtains. A settee and several chairs in gold with rose patterns held court around the plush rug next to the fireplace. Was there a reason he'd brought me to this room? The same one where my father had waited when he'd paused on his return trip to Portsmouth before acting so deplorably. Even though Lord Warnwick left the door open as he directed me to the settee across from him, I had to take a deep breath to calm my nerves. This was highly improper, meeting a young earl this way, even if he was a beast at the moment. We weren't properly chaperoned, though my reputation had little to lose. Lord Warnwick eased into one of the chairs, folding his animal limbs carefully as if he was still unused to his knee bending the wrong way. The lower parts of his limbs stuck out slightly, as if, thanks to his new animal anatomy, he could no longer comfortably sit.
"Now, Miss Clampton, would you please kindly explain why you, a lady, would be willing to work off a few pence on your father's behalf?"
I folded my hands in my lap. Where to begin the story of my family's decline? As you may have heard, my uncle, the late Mr. Neville Clampton, squandered his means. When he passed, the estate passed to my father, George Clampton. My father had gone into the Navy and rose to the rank of admiral with enough wealth to see us living comfortably in Portsmouth. He was forced to sink the money, including the dowries for my sisters and me, into the estate. Yet it still wasn't enough to make up for the debts and mismanagement of my uncle. My father continued to go to sea, leaving the estate in the hands of a steward, in order to earn enough prize money to see us back to our comfortable estate. At Trafalgar, fighting under our esteemed Admiral Nelson, my father sustained an injury to his head that has left him confused and no longer the man he was in my younger years. Lord Warnwick was still watching me with intent yellow eyes. When I paused, he motioned with one paw, prompting me to continue. I gathered my thoughts. I hadn't meant to reveal this much, but if there was anyone who understood the humiliation of a scandal not of his own making, it would be the man inside the beast, sitting across from me. Perhaps even more so. While I'd had 6 years to get used to the slowly diminishing prospects of our fortune, he was still in the throes of his scandal, having been cursed only a few months ago. His curse was still the talk of gossips and tongue-waggers, and much speculation was made about the possibility that he could lose his position of second Lord of the Magickry during next season's sitting of Parliament. The scandal must be far from resolved if he was still hiding here, in a rural country estate far even from the country villages. As I opened my mouth to continue, a tall, willowy woman marched into the room bearing a tray. Her white apron glistened crisply, too fresh compared to the spatters across the front of her skirt, not quite concealed by the apron. Was she the cook? Or housekeeper? She set the tray on the table, served the tea, and whisked away with barely a glance in my direction. I pinched the teacup, longing to cradle it in my cold fingers. Over the past 6 years, our fortunes have diminished. The estate is entailed, and we have had to let go the staff from both the estate and my father's house in Portsmouth. I suspect we will have to sell the house, though it is the one place my father acts somewhat himself. I anticipate I shall enter the working class shortly. I can only hope the scandal does not harm my sister's prospects of good marriages too disastrously.
"I see."
Lord Warnwick leaned back in his chair, his word slurring a bit on the S, as if it was hard to say past his fangs. I sipped at my tea and waited for his verdict on us. I wasn't sure what I was expecting from him. Sympathy? Surely not. He was an earl. My father was simply a landed gentleman and an admiral in the Royal Navy, not quite up to Lord Warnwick's stature. It wasn't like Lord Warnwick could or would do anything about our situation. My father had torn down his curtains to make me a dress, after all. A dress I had the nerve to be wearing. Lord Warnwick's nostrils flared as he studied me yet again with those slitted yellow cat eyes of his.
You let your staff go, you said?
Yes, my lord. I hid my fingers against my dress, even if my tattered gloves did a decent job of covering my new calluses. Though I shouldn't have bothered. I was trying to convince him I was capable of working to pay off the debt my father owed him. My sisters and I have taken over the upkeep of the house. He nodded, the action sending his mane poofing even farther around his head.
As you may have noticed, I am short of staff. Most of the servants left the moment they learned of my condition.
Not only had they left, but they also were the ones who spread the news of his misfortune, creating a far worse scandal than might have been. I had been thankful that our staff had been much more loyal, even when let go. Lord Warnwick made a noise that might have been him clearing his throat, though it came out as something of a rumbly squeak.
Would you be willing to take a position here? I have a cook, a maid, a stable hand, and a gardener. But that is all. I would pay you a decent wage with a half-day off each week.
A permanent job. I cocked my head. With my lack of references, I would be hard-pressed to take that first position, especially since I would have to beg it off one of my peers, who would only be horrified at my reduced circumstances. But here, with Lord Warnwick turned into a beast, the lack of visitors or staff would prevent my own personal scandal from spreading. With a salary, I might be able to provide for my father and sisters. Perhaps even save up enough to give them something of a dowry, or coming out to get them safely wed before they too had to enter domestic service. I smoothed my skirt. I would be honored to take the job.
Very good. If you wish, you can start immediately. I can have a note delivered to your father or sisters to inform them of your whereabouts.
Lord Warnwick stood, straightening his limbs slowly. I stood as well, then hesitated. I had been hired mere seconds ago. Would it be wise to make a suggestion to my employer so soon? But what harm could it do? He was desperate enough for staff that I doubted he would toss me out just yet. If I may be so bold, the staff my family had to let go is very loyal and hard-working. Many of them are still without new positions. I highly recommend them. He arched one of his bristly cat eyebrows.
Would they be willing to come work for a beast?
If I wrote to them, they would. Most served in the Royal Navy with my father. They do not frighten easily. I clasped my hands behind my back, thinking through the list of names I would give him. A few of the maids, my father's butler, who could double as a valet in a pinch.
I will provide paper and ink and post the letters for you as soon as they can be written.
Lord Warnwick gestured to the door.
Let me properly introduce you to Mrs. Dentley, and you can get started.
I set out in his wake, hopeful for the first time in far too long, even if I had just taken on a position in the manner of the beast. Chapter 2. On how we devised a plan. My first week in Lord Warnwick's service passed more smoothly than I had expected. Sally and Mary, maids who had previously worked at my father's house in Portsmouth, arrived only 2 days after I posted my letter. They helped me set the house to rights, cleaning, dusting, polishing. Mr. Fenton, my father's butler, arrived a few days after that. He was a thin old man in his 80s who had been in the Navy since the War of Jenkins' Ear, until age and a splinter to the thigh had forced him to stay ashore. Thankfully, he had enough sense of style to assist Lord Warnwick as valet when he wasn't needed as butler. The state of Lord Warnwick's cravat improved immediately. Somehow, along the way, I found myself as the de facto housekeeper. I hadn't been appointed that position, and I had been willing to do anything, including the manual scrubbing in the kitchen. But the servants who had served me before still saw me as Miss Clampton, and even Lord Warnwick treated me with more deference than he did the other servants due to my prior standing. 2 weeks after my arrival at Lord Warnwick's house, I was dusting the library. Of all the rooms, it was my favorite in the house. The vast volumes, including many of the recently published novels that seemed odd for a young bachelor to read, filled his shelves. Then there was the wall of magic books, some rare, some not so rare. I traced the spine of one. Magic was one subject that fascinated me, though I had studied it far less than I would have liked. It, like the sciences and mathematics, apparently belonged to the world of men, beyond the understanding of women. But I had mastered mathematics under my father's tutelage, and put that knowledge to good use the past years trying to eke out an existence and keep my family out of the poorhouse. Years ago, one of the magiologists assigned to Father's ship had begun teaching me the basics of magic when the ship had been laid up for refitting. But then they had sailed off, and the magiologist had been killed trying to defend the ship from the French magiologist. I hadn't been able to convince a magiologist to teach me since. Did I dare ask Lord Warnwick if I could borrow his books? That was a request appropriate for a guest, not his servant. I had to remember my new position in life, even if Lord Warnwick treated me with less disdain than another peer might have considering the circumstances. I stopped with my finger over the title of one. On the Study of Transformations and Diverse Metamorphoses. It stuck out a few inches from the others, as if it had recently been read and put back. Perhaps not too surprising considering Lord Warnwick's situation. He would do his research into breaking the spell placed on him, after all. After a glance around, I pulled the book from the shelf and skimmed the page. The regulatory principle of magics and forces remains applicatory. Even in the case of the most cunning of legerdemain, the properties of the magicked being or items remains intact no matter how radically altered and modified. Ah, this was going to be one of those kinds of books. The ones where the author used as many big words and technical jargon as possible to make himself look intelligent. Or, perhaps, because he was so deeply entrenched in his field, he didn't know how to write intelligibly anymore. I froze at the sound of clicking claws on wood entering the room. I didn't have time to replace the book or pretend I hadn't been browsing through Lord Warnwick's library when I should have been working. He halted next to me.
Interesting choice of reading, Miss Clampton.
I shoved the book back into place. I apologize, Lord Warnwick. It won't happen again. With your permission, I'll return to my dusting. He shook his maned head and stalked toward one of the chairs by the fire. He slumped into it.
Do not trouble yourself. No one but me is going to see this house, and I am not bothered by a little dust.
I hadn't seen him in a few days, and his eyes seemed to droop with what I guessed was exhaustion. Mr. Fenton had told me Lord Warnwick had been in London meeting with the professors of magicry from Oxford and the magiologists from the Academy of Magic. I didn't dare ask since it wasn't my place, but as Lord Warnwick was still a beast, I assumed it hadn't gone well. I went back to dusting, trying to ignore the beast slouched in the chair staring into the fire I'd stoked in the hearth earlier.
How do you deal so cheerfully with your situation?
I jumped at the rumbly sound of his voice. I turned and found his yellow eyes fixed on me. It took me a few seconds of deep breaths to calm my heartbeat and steady my thoughts. I guess, sir, I don't have a choice about my situation, so I might as well be cheerful about it. And thanks to your generosity, it hasn't turned out as terribly as it might have.
Still, if you're stuck in service the rest of your life?
I shrugged. Then so be it. I hesitated, seeing the slump to his already sloped shoulders. Should I ask? It wasn't my place, but he didn't have anyone for whom it was their place. All his friends had deserted him in this scandal, as had his servants. But what could I lose? I doubted he would toss me out for speaking to my better. May I speak boldly, sir? I know it isn't my place. I set the duster on a shelf and clasped my hands in front of me. He waved to the seat across from him.
Be my guest.
I took his invitation. It was a sign, perhaps, of my undecided place in this household. Once a lady, yet not quite a servant either. Something both and neither. I take it your consultation didn't go well?
No, it did not.
He huffed a sigh that flared the ends of his pink cat's nostrils.
The greatest magiologists in all of England, and none of them have as yet discovered the means to release me from this spell. Whoever cast this must either be a greater practitioner than we have yet seen, or one who knows some obscure spells we have not yet encountered. Perhaps from the African continent, given my resemblance to one of their great cats. Or perhaps some influence from the Americas. I've heard those Yankees have no compunctions about tampering and experimenting with spells beyond what we would dare attempt.
I found myself nodding, but I didn't speak. I wanted to encourage him to continue. He seemed much as my father had after a particularly hard voyage, when he just had to confide in someone. As my mother had long since passed away, I had become my father's confidant. I wouldn't dare assume such familiarity with Lord Warnwick, but he appeared to need someone in that capacity.
It has been 6 months. 6 months of experiments and studies, and reading the most learned books on the subject. Yet nothing seems to break the spell.
Lord Warnwick stared at the curled ends of his claws resting in his lap.
Some days I wonder if I will remain this way forever. Shut away from polite society, my name forever tainted from the scandal of the second Lord of the Magicry being afflicted with a spell.
That was understandably concerning. It would ruin his career and his life. As a beast, he couldn't marry. His estate would fall to some distant cousin. He flexed his claws, his eyes still focused on them as if he saw the fingers he'd once had beneath the fur covering them.
More than that, we still don't know who cast this spell. It could be a political rival or, worse yet, a foreign agent.
A foreign agent? Meaning the French. I swallowed. A French spy or a sympathizer would have good cause to magic Lord Warnwick and use the ensuing scandal to keep him from voting in Parliament. He was one of the supporters of the funding for both the naval blockade of the French coast and the Peninsula campaign. If he didn't use his influence, was it possible Parliament would withdraw from the continent and cede it to Napoleon? Without our navy keeping the French fleet locked in its ports, how long would it take Napoleon to turn his guns on England? Something had to be done. My mind churned over the problem and the possibilities. This was a problem, and like every mathematical problem, it could be solved. I had never mastered the accomplishments of art or playing the pianoforte or embroidery. I didn't have the imagination for that. But mathematics and sciences? Set numbers with formulas and rules? Those I could master. I smoothed my apron and faced him. It was time to pretend that, for a moment, I was his equal and speak my mind. He might sack me for it, but I didn't care. The way I see it, you have two root problems, one personal and one national. On the personal side, you wish to break the spell and regain your life. On the national side, you have your role in Parliament that has been jeopardized by persons unknown. To solve this problem, you need to reveal this person and restore your good name in time for your vote to hold weight in Parliament. Lord Warnwick stared.
Very nicely put, Miss Clampton. But I don't see how I can solve either of those problems. I have been trying, you know.
But perhaps you have been approaching it the wrong way. At the moment, there is nothing either of us can do about the spell besides continue to research. But as to the other, national problem, that I believe we can handle.
We?
He arched his whiskered eye ridge. Bold of me, I knew, but the plan forming in my mind was one it would take a woman to execute. Yes, we. So far, you have tried to alleviate the scandal by retreating here and staying out of the public eye.
What else could I do?
He said it not as an accusation, but as a genuine question. Perhaps nothing, but staying out of the public has only caused the rumors to grow worse. I didn't say those rumors out loud. Some of the worst of them, involving cannibalism and the poor Lord Warnwick being locked in a cage to keep him from rampaging through the county, didn't need to be said. I think at this point, it would be better to face society and show the rumors to be false.
Appear in society like this?
He gestured at himself, from his maned cat's face to his clawed animal limbs.
My own servants ran in fear the moment they caught sight of me.
I didn't say it would be easy, but if approached correctly, I believe your condition, rather than garnering fear, could instead engage the sympathies of society. I let my gaze travel to the wall of books beyond Lord Warnwick, as I thought the plan through. Yes, the right approach. First, we'll need to have Mr. Fenton and Mrs. Dentley drop hints in the village and write to their families about the poor put upon Lord Warnwick. How grievously you have been injured and misused with this disastrous spell. With a careful campaign, we can turn the public's sympathy toward you.
Campaign? Are we waging a war?
His lips parted in what must have been an attempt at a smile, though the effect was ruined by his enormous fangs. I gave him the sternest look I could manage. At the moment, I wasn't his servant. I was his first lieutenant. I am an admiral's daughter. That is exactly what I'm planning. A war for your image and standing. And like any sea battle, we need to gain the weather gauge before we can swoop in for the kill.
What is that kill?
Lord Warnwick must have been familiar enough with naval terminology not to blink at my use of weather gauge, the term used for gaining the position upwind of the enemy vessel. This was the part of the plan I didn't think he'd like. We shoot for the waterline, of course. In other words, where it counts. This scandal has ruined your standing. Therefore, we restore that standing by once again making you the most eligible bachelor in all England. It is simple, really. If we drop a few hints to the right matrons that the only way to break the spell is for you to fall in love with a girl and for her to fall in love with you in return, mothers and their eligible daughters will be clamoring for an invitation to your house parties and balls. They will all want their daughter to be the one to break the spell and secure your affections. The more I talked, the more his smile faded, until he looked more ready to bite me than grin. Not that he would. I didn't believe the rumors that the spell had tampered with his brain enough for him to forget his humanity to that extent.
It won't work.
His voice had a growl to it.
It won't break the spell.
That doesn't matter. The point will be to make you once again the toast of London by the time the season begins. I held myself as still and upright as I could, like a midshipman reporting to his captain. That part will work, believe me. As a young lady who has participated in society, I know how these matrons and their daughters think. The London season couldn't be that different from the society found in Portsmouth, surely. It would have more pomp and riches and wealth, but the basic principles would remain the same.
I don't want to toy with anyone's affections, not when I can't commit to an engagement as long as this spell lasts.
His claws no longer rested in his lap, but curled into the armrests. I bit my lip, holding my breath that they wouldn't puncture the upholstery. You won't if you navigate the season correctly. I let myself have a small smile. I had one last argument I knew he wouldn't refuse. Besides, this plan could potentially force the perpetrator of your spell to come out of hiding to keep you from regaining your status. Whoever worked this spell has already gone to a lot of trouble to see to it that your good name was ruined. He is not about to let you restore that. Lord Warnwick let go of the armrests and settled back in the chair. I breathed a sigh of relief when I didn't see any stuffing poking through holes. It must have survived its master's assault.
You could be right. After all, they took the time to cast this complicated spell rather than simply have me killed. This caused a scandal focused on me rather than an investigation leading to them.
That was something to consider. Why had they gone with a spell rather than death? And why this spell? Perhaps because they knew it couldn't be easily broken? Their mistake. Scandal is something we can fix, at least. Death is more permanent. I was an admiral's daughter, growing up in Portsmouth. I saw ships leave with full complements, only to limp home with a third of their crews missing. Handsome lieutenants I had once flirted with found early graves in the sea. Captains who never saw the benefits of their new rank. Even the survivors didn't come out of their brush with death unscathed. Limbs missing, the ravages of battle evident in their eyes and on their minds. Those, like my father, who never fully regained what they had given for king and country. Lord Warnwick gave his squeaky cough once again.
Is this something you would be willing to oversee, Miss Clampton? I know I have already placed many duties upon you.
I tugged on my apron. I may have been born a gentlewoman, but I am now your servant. I am grateful to you for giving me this position when I have so few qualifications for it. especially when I speak my mind out of turn. But yes, this is something I would be willing to organize, though I have one request before I agree.
And that is?
His slitted eyes narrowed, as if he wasn't sure what I would request from him. That my name and position in this household be kept a secret. I will organize this from below stairs and remain there. I still have my sisters to think of, and I would rather my position affect them as little as possible. I had to look away then. In the half days I'd had off since coming here, I'd visited my sisters and father. They were surviving, but struggling without me to keep the household running properly. My sisters, too young to debut yet, didn't have the skills to navigate the world of finance the way I did. On my next half day, I would run errands and visit the creditors myself, since I didn't trust them or my father to handle the money I'd earned to support them.
I believe that could be manageable.
Lord Warnwick nodded and rose.
I believe I should let you return to dusting.
Thank you, my lord. I stood as well. At the door, he halted and turned.
Miss Clampton, why is it that you aren't scared of me?
I cocked my head. Why wasn't I scared of him? I hadn't been scared of him even in those first moments after I'd been dumped off on his front lawn. I've said before, I'm an admiral's daughter. I grew up in Portsmouth. I've seen many men return from these wars scarred and battered, and their deformities are no spell with no cure. All they have to look forward to are long years of being treated like monsters after having sacrificed their bodies for the very people who scorn them.
Even so, they are still human.
Lord Warnwick stared down at himself.
I'm not.
Yes, you are. Your basic essence and being is, anyway. That is the first law of transformation. An object or person retains the essence and being they were created or born with, no matter how they are transformed. A table may be turned into a dog or a rug or a book, but at its essence, it will still always be a table. You, sir, are still the human Lord James Enton, Earl of Warnwick, even transformed into a beast. Your enemies can't take that away.
Are you giving me, the second Lord of the Magicry, a lecture on the basic natural laws of magic?
When he cocked his head, his mane flared farther around his head. I ducked my head. Was he offended? Had I forgotten my place one too many times, and now he was going to sack me? I'm sorry, my lord. I won't step out of line again. He regarded me with those yellow cat's eyes of his set in his leonine head.
Your forthrightness gives me cause to believe this plan might work.
He made as if to turn, but paused again. He nodded toward the shelf, holding his collection of magic books.
You may borrow a few if you'd like. Perhaps with your new perspective, you will find something I have missed.
I couldn't reply, not even with a proper curtsy, before he stalked from the room, his claws clicking where they met hardwood floor. Why had he offered to let me borrow books from his library? That wasn't the gesture of a lord to his servant. It was more like a gracious host, entertaining a guest. But I wasn't a guest. Was I? Chapter 3. On how we put the plan into action. Mrs. Dentley and Mr. Fenton understood the first part of my plan immediately. Mrs. Dentley nodded as I explained, her whole slim frame shaking with the vigor of her agreement.
Oh, I can do that, miss. Lady Ethelwyle's cook comes to town tomorrow, and she's known for her gossip. She'll have this spread about the countryside in no time, mark my words.
Mrs. Dentley also had a sister in service in Derbyshire and a cousin in Yorkshire. Both of them were promptly written and instructed on what to say to certain individuals in their parish. Mr. Fenton also exercised his connections in various households. Some of the men with whom he had worked had also gone into service after being set ashore from the Navy. Even some of his former captains, younger sons in good families, held enough respect for him to call on them as well. Within days, the local village buzzed with new rumors about Lord Warnwick, ones that cast him in a favorable light as a much maligned and misused lord. Within the week, Portsmouth also gossiped about it, enough that Admiral Billingsley, a colleague of my father's, contacted him to learn more. Thankfully, I intercepted the letter and was able to provide my own account, leaving out only my own involvement in Lord Warnwick's household. A few days after that, Lord Warnwick called me into his study. I took one of the chairs across from his desk. In here, he had even more books, though many of these looked like ledgers and accounts.
Mr. Fenton tells me that so far your campaign has been a success.
Lord Warnwick tapped his clawed fingers on his desk. I believe so, my lord. I sat straight in the chair. Dressing as a maid did have some advantages. My bodice wasn't as restricting as it lacked the stays that a gentlewoman wore. It was time to put the next part of the plan into action, but I wasn't sure how to approach the subject, especially about the preparation necessary to host a house party. My lord, I believe it would be beneficial for you to host a house party here. It would be your reintroduction to polite society.
I suppose.
Lord Warnwick glanced down at himself, his frown almost hiding the tips of his fangs. Interesting that his frown would be less formidable than his smile. To host such a party, however, I believe we'll need some preparation. You will need more staff. Sally, Mary, Mrs. Dentley, and I couldn't handle such an endeavor by ourselves, especially not if I wanted to keep myself out of public view.
Do you know anyone else who would be willing to hire on under such circumstances?
Lord Warnwick's claws flicked, as if he had resisted the urge to gesture at himself. The rumors have put you in a better light, and many would be willing to serve under you. But I believe I can recommend several men and their wives from Portsmouth. They are sailors who served under my father, who have been out of work since their ship was decommissioned, and the Navy hasn't recommissioned them on another ship due to the possibility Parliament could reduce naval funding. As a member of the House of Lords who supports the gallant efforts of our Navy, they will serve you very loyally and effectively, at least as best as they are able. I wasn't going to mention that some of the men hadn't been given another ship because of injuries, such as missing limbs. Perhaps Lord Warnwick would turn them away the moment he saw their disfigurements, as so many around Portsmouth and abroad in England had done. But I didn't think so. Not with his own plight so obvious when he saw himself in a mirror.
Very good. I will give you a list of the positions that need to be filled. Once you write to them, I would like to interview them before they are given the job officially.
Lord Warnwick reached for a quill and paper. He gripped the quill in his paw, surprisingly dexterous despite his claws. When he wrote, his handwriting wasn't as polished as it had once been, but at least he had retained that ability. It would have been a further humiliation if he had been forced into dictation. I waited while he compiled his list. When he handed it to me, I resisted the urge to clear my throat. You should also visit a tailor. While most of your clothes fit, well, all things considered, it would be better to have a few more customized to your present form. And a cobbler wouldn't be amiss either.
Lord Warnwick blinked. What tailor or cobbler is going to service me in my current state? I have done my best to spell my clothes to fit, but spells have their limitations when it comes to the finer points.
That was one of the few basics of magic I had been taught. Spells could only do something within specific parameters. A table could be transformed into a flower or a tree, because those things existed on their own. But a man-made object, like a suit, took multiple items like cloth and thread, with detailed measurements and placement of items, thereby making it nearly impossible to spell a suit into existence merely from a pile of fabric and thread. A magiologist might be able to influence the needle on a sewing machine to fly faster, or even operate without human power, though such a spell would require constant maintenance and contact with the magiologist in order to last. Magiologists on my father's ships usually concentrated on protections, spelling ropes to be stronger so that they didn't snap under the force of the gun's discharge, spelling the hull to withstand more force from the enemy's shot, trying to send the enemy's shot off course so that it never hits the ship in the first place. Of course, the enemy magiologists were doing the same thing, and often a ship's demise in battle came from its magiologist being drained of magic or killed. But magic wasn't the solution in this case. I believe I know a tailor and cobbler in Portsmouth who would be willing to help you. While they are both more experienced with making naval vestments rather than gentlemen's clothing, they are experienced in accommodating clothing to a person's particular needs. Having outfitted naval personnel returning from the wars, Lord Warnwick's particular predicament wouldn't be that much more exotic. Actually, he probably wasn't the first person the tailor had serviced with animalistic features. Spelling animal features was a common way to disable enemy crewmen during battle. Giving them the head of a parrot or the wings of a seagull could disrupt the integrity of the gun crews. Often these spells were summarily broken by the ship's magiologist, but sometimes the poor sailors had to return to England to get more specialized help, if they could afford it, in breaking the curse, before they could be returned to normal. Very well. Lord Warnwick shifted in his chair, as if he were the one waiting to be dismissed. With a nod from him, I gathered the list of positions that needed filling, curtsied, and left the room to see to my tasks for the rest of the day. It only took a few days to set up appointments for the tailor and the cobbler to come to Downshead Hall to see Lord Warnwick's wardrobe. While some of his vestments were modified better to fit him, shoes and stockings were the largest challenge. As I'd learned from Mrs. Dentley, Lord Warnwick's claws tended to shred any stockings he tried to put on, even if he attempted to file down the claws to be less sharp. Normal shoes didn't stay on his paws as they lacked a heel. The cobbler, however, was able to do wonders. With his naval experience, he fashioned several pairs of naval-style boots that came up nearly to Lord Warnwick's knees. The height allowed them to lace tightly to prevent them slipping off, and helped disguise some of the animalistic shape of Lord Warnwick's paws. There was nothing the tailor could do to minimize the oddity of having limbs that were shaped the same as an animal's. Lord Warnwick's knees bent the wrong way, after all. But the tailor instead made customized breeches that, instead of trying to disguise the animal, highlighted it so that it looked almost charming. I probably shouldn't have had knowledge of these things. An intimate knowledge of a man's wardrobe was hardly befitting a young lady of any standing, even a servant. But I'd had to see to most of my father's wardrobe for the past year, and as a girl growing up in Portsmouth around an abundance of naval men as my father rose through the ranks, I had lost some of the blushing modesty of most girls of my class. Still, I did my best not to appear too well informed as I helped Mr. Fenton settle the accounts with the tailor and the cobbler, and helped Mrs. Dentley and the maids with the laundry. By the time the former sailors and their wives arrived, most of them receiving a position at Downshead Hall after an interview with Lord Warnwick, I had most of the details of the plan taken care of. The proper invitations had been sent out for a local house party. The house had been cleaned and straightened into its former glory before its staff deserted it and its lord. And Lord Warnwick had been properly outfitted as a gentleman of his rank should, even considering his peculiar circumstances. Now, all that remained was to see that the house party was a smashing success. Lord Warnwick's future in society and his vote in Parliament depended on it. Chapter 4. On a House Party with a Beast. The guests arrived in 2s and 4s on the day the house party began. The first to arrive were the aged Lord and Lady Ethelwyle. Next came the widowed Lady Wilson, while her young son Archie had been left at her estate in the care of a nanny. Several local members of Parliament were invited, including Mr. Doyle and Mr. Sutton. Admiral Billingsley and his wife were also invited. Not only would the house party hopefully regain Lord Warnwick's place in society, it would also allow him to discuss politics with his fellow members of Parliament, both in the House of Lords and the House of Commons. Mr. Sutton had voted against Lord Warnwick on occasion, while Mr. Doyle's opinions were not yet known, as this would be his first term serving in the House of Commons. Lord Ethelwyle had an interest in naval affairs and had often voted for the war, while Lady Wilson's husband had been torn on naval matters, having had 2 brothers who had been killed serving in the Army and Navy. As Lord Wilson had also suffered an early demise, running the estate had been no safer for him than war had been for his brothers. I did my best to stay out of sight, letting Mrs. Clark, one of the recent hires, take on the role of housekeeper for the guests. Several of the guests, Admiral Billingsley and Lady Ethelwyle especially, would remember me from around Portsmouth. This house party was about alleviating scandal, not causing more of it. I watched from a hidden alcove as Lord Warnwick greeted his guests. Even with his cat's muzzle and form, he still managed to appear the gentleman in his black polished boots, white breeches, and dark green waistcoat. Mr. Fenton had managed a lovely twist and knot to Lord Warnwick's cravat, and he'd even trimmed Lord Warnwick's claws enough so that he could fit into a decent pair of gloves. All in all, my plan appeared to be succeeding. Once they disappeared into the parlor, I crept along the hallway and pressed my ear to the door, where I could listen in. Yes, I was being nosy beyond my place. I was a servant now, even if I had once held the standing to be among the guests. But I consoled myself with the knowledge that I was the mastermind of this plan. I needed to know how the battle was being fought, so that I could react if the need should arise. A good admiral never stayed so far out of the fight that he can't direct it personally. Lady Wilson was talking in her high-pitched but genteel voice.
"Thank you so much for your invitation, Lord Warnwick."
"My pleasure." Lord Warnwick's rumbling baritone filled the room. "I am honored that you would take the time to come so soon after your period of mourning has ended."
"It is refreshing to get out and remember that life continues on after my dear Henry's passing."
Lady Wilson's voice held the tiniest quaver. I couldn't force myself to listen more. Nothing much had changed in the last year. The conversation remained superficial and staid. Perhaps I would have kept up with it nicely had I been there, replete in a morning dress and lace gloves. But I had fended for myself and my family these past 6 years. Normal conversation held no appeal for me anymore. I tiptoed away from the door. While Lord Warnwick and his guests were occupied, now would be my chance to sneak a book from the library and take it back to my room. With all the preparations, I hadn't had a chance to further my magical education, even with Lord Warnwick's invitation. If I didn't claim a book now, I would be hard-pressed to find another time with guests in the house. I stole into the library and found the book on transformations I'd pulled out before. I also grabbed a few more books that looked like they contained the basics of magical theory and history. I wasn't sure why I was so convinced I could solve this problem for Lord Warnwick, when the finest magical scholars in England had yet to break this particular spell. I was a mere girl, all of 20 years old with barely any magical training, and armed with only the books Lord Warnwick had no doubt memorized with frequent rereadings in the past months. Somehow, I thought I could make a difference in this as well. Perhaps it was pride on my part, an arrogance even my reduced circumstances had yet to drive out of me. Still, I returned to my room for the time I had before I would have to help with the preparations for supper. Most of the books on magic were easy to decipher, especially the magical primer that seemed designed to be used by schoolboys just starting out on their magical education. But the book on transformations, the most necessary of all of them, was dense. The author apparently went out of his way to use the longest words imaginable, when a word half the size would do just as nicely. No wonder Lord Warnwick hadn't gotten anything out of this book to help with his predicament. Still, I had to try. On the third day of the house party, all the guests were still in residence, which was an encouraging sign. None of them had fled upon viewing their host's countenance. I peered out of my bedroom window, hiding until the guests and Lord Warnwick left on their ride, before I dared venture downstairs to help Mrs. Dentley and the maids ready the meal and straighten the household. Lord Warnwick's groom led out a tall black unicorn for him to ride. The unicorn's nostrils flared, but it didn't shy away when Lord Warnwick mounted. He sat the steed well, even considering the long angle of his backward limbs, though I doubted he would be able to sit as well if the gait of the horse became more than a fast trot. Where his knees were placed, he wouldn't be able to grip the horse's stomach and chest as effectively as a humanly shaped rider. Lady Wilson was given a dainty brown palfrey, while the men each received stallions of their own, though all of them were regular horses and not unicorns. Probably because unicorns were expensive to purchase. Even a lord as rich as Lord Warnwick, with his holdings abroad and in England, would be reluctant to purchase more than one unicorn for a riding horse. He probably made decent income breeding the unicorn with some of his saddle horses, which produced a horse sturdier and more aware than a normal horse, yet lacking the horn and full qualities of a unicorn. A unicorn's most qualifying feature as a riding and carriage beast came from its ability to sense danger. Carriages pulled by unicorns got into far less accidents than those pulled by normal horses, which was why the Prince Regent always traveled in a carriage pulled by 4 matching white unicorns, and refused to even set foot in a carriage pulled by normal horses. Most of the dukes in the realm had the same peculiarity. I promised myself that one of these days I would slip out to the stables to approach Lord Warnwick's unicorn. Growing up, I'd always wanted one, even if I knew such an animal would be far out of my family's means. Even a small Welsh unicorn, the shaggy beasts of burden that proliferated naturally in the Welsh Highlands, would be beyond my father's pay, even with his extensive prize money. Perhaps if he hadn't inherited the estate, and had remained hale and healthy enough to continue his career in the Navy, then maybe. Still, I would have a chance to touch one, if Lord Warnwick's unicorn was of the type to allow itself to be petted. If not for the busyness of the past days, I would have gone already the moment I'd learned he owned a unicorn. When the riders set out, the other horses tended to snort and steer clear of Lord Warnwick on his unicorn, as if they were frightened of his large cat scent that reminded them of a predator. Why didn't that seem to bother his unicorn? Was it perhaps, thanks to its uncanny ability, the unicorn could sense that he wasn't a danger, even if he smelled like a large feline predator from the wilds of Africa or America? That was something to think about. Perhaps unicorns had more ability than I had been taught, to sense deeper than the outer layer put on by a spell. They could sense that Lord Warnwick's essence was still human, even under the layer the transformation had given him. Hadn't I read somewhere in one of the magic books I'd borrowed from Lord Warnwick's library that various parts of unicorns were good for breaking curses? Was this, perhaps, due to their magical gift of sensing deception, even the magical kind? Was there a link between sensing a deception and breaking it? I couldn't be sure. Besides, the magiologists at Oxford undoubtedly had already tried every version of spell breaking, using unicorn horn dust and tail hair and other parts cultivated from the unicorn stock they kept on campus. Most of those things could be collected from living unicorns, as their horns could be trimmed without hurting them, much the way a hoof or a toenail could be trimmed. Once the house guests were out of sight, I slipped downstairs and into the parlor. Perhaps I would have enough time to dust it and polish the furniture before they returned. As soon as I stepped into the parlor, I halted. Lady Ethelwyle perched in one of the chairs by the fire. Her husband snored in the chair across from her. I quickly ducked my head, hoping she hadn't gotten a good look at my face. She had her spectacles perched on the end of her nose, her face tilted toward the novel in her lap, so the odds were high that she hadn't gotten more than a blurred impression of my face when she glanced up at me. "I beg your pardon, my lady. I will come back later. I thought all the guests had gone out," I murmured, pitching my voice higher to disguise it. Of everyone at this house party, why did it have to be her? She turned back to her novel. "Never mind us. Our old bones can't take the vigorous rides with the young people. Carriages are more to our liking." I backed toward the door. I should have done a better job of counting up the guests when they had set out on their ride. So much for a mathematical mind. "I will come back later. I wouldn't want to disturb your reading or rest." Even if Lord Ethelwyle was snoring loud enough that I doubted he could be disturbed. As I turned to go, my gaze snagged once again on the novel Lady Ethelwyle was reading. It was one of those scandalous Gothic novels, and the lady was nearly finished with this one. "Would you like me to bring you another novel from my lord's library, my lady?" "Thank you. Something new and exciting." Lady Ethelwyle flipped another page, her eyes solely focused on the page. I doubted Lord Warnwick's library would have the more controversial Gothic novels like one Lady Ethelwyle was reading. I'd read the opening chapter of Zofloya and promptly set it down, my face flaming. I hurried to the library and browsed Lord Warnwick's collection of novels, finally finding Tobias Smollett's The Adventures of Roderick Random. Filled with plenty of scandal, adventure, and the blood and guts of a naval surgeon's life on board a warship, it seemed the sort of thing a Gothic novel-reading matron might enjoy, if she hadn't read it already. When I returned to the parlor and handed the book to her, She thanked me, but didn't look up, her page count rapidly diminishing. I hurried from the room, breathing a sigh of relief once I was in the hall. On the 4th morning of the house party, I went to Lord Warnwick's study to set the household accounts for the beginning of that week on his desk. Somewhere along the way, I had taken over that duty as Mr. Fenton knew I had the brains for numbers. I enjoyed it, and it was a welcome break from dusting and seeing that the rest of the staff saw to their duties. But this time, the study door was unlocked and standing slightly ajar. It was too early in the morning for Lord Warnwick to be up and in his study. I pushed the door open slightly and peered inside. Mr. Doyle, one of the MPs invited to the house party, was snooping through the papers on Lord Warnwick's desk. There was no good reason for Mr. Doyle to be there, except that he was doing something suspicious. But how suspicious? Was he spying on a member of the House of Lords, trying to figure out how he planned to vote on upcoming issues? Or was it more sinister than that? French spy? Even part of the plot to magic Lord Warnwick in the first place? I tiptoed backwards and down the hall until I could turn a corner. I didn't want Mr. Doyle to know I'd spotted him. I had to find Lord Warnwick. Was he up yet? Even I didn't have so little decorum that I would knock on his bedchamber, even if I had important intelligence such as this. I navigated the servants' hallways until I reached the alcove outside the breakfast room. Lady Wilson was there, along with Mr. Sutton and Admiral Billingsley and his wife. With the clicking of claws, Lord Warnwick entered. He nodded to his guests, pausing to converse with Lady Wilson before he reached for a plate.
"Excuse me, Miss Clampton. I need to bring this plate in."
Mary tapped my elbow, holding a plate piled with steaming sausage in her free hand.
"Mr. Doyle and Mr. Sutton managed to polish off most of the sausage before the rest of the household woke."
Probably because Mr. Doyle needed strength to go snooping in Lord Warnwick's study. Was Mr. Sutton also in on this plot, whatever sort of plot it was? I laid a hand on Mary's arm. "Can you tell Lord Warnwick that he's needed in the kitchen for something? I have something important I have to discuss with him." Mary cocked her head and eyed me, but she didn't ask for an explanation.
"All right, miss."
I waited while Mary minced into the room, set the plate on the breakfast table, and curtsied to Lord Warnwick and passed along my message. Lord Warnwick nodded, then excused himself. I intercepted him in the hallway and curtsied. "My lord, when I went to set the kitchen accounts on your desk this morning, I spotted Mr. Doyle rifling through your papers. Somehow he'd gotten inside. I didn't confront him, but came here to report to you." Lord Warnwick stiffened. His mane and the scruff at the back of his neck rose just like a cat's did when riled. "Is that so? Thanks for informing me." When he stalked down the hallway toward his study, I trailed a few feet behind, curious as to what he planned to do. Would he confront Mr. Doyle? When we reached the study, Mr. Doyle was at the door, his hand on the knob as if he'd just pulled it closed behind him. He jumped, turned, and pasted on an oily smile.
"Lord Warnwick, just the man I needed to talk to. One of your servants must have gotten careless. I found this door unlocked when I was passing here on the way to the breakfast room."
If I hadn't already spied him inside the room snooping, it might have been a believable story. After all, it cast the blame on me, a mere servant and somewhat novice housekeeper, rather than a member of Parliament. Lord Warnwick nodded and stepped aside. "I will have to have a word with my staff about carelessness." I hung back in the shadows until Mr. Doyle had slipped past me on his way to the breakfast room, acting as if he hadn't already stuffed himself so full of breakfast that the maid had to bring more sausages. "Miss Clampton?" Lord Warnwick pushed open the door and motioned me to precede him inside. I did so, standing off to the side as Lord Warnwick searched through his desk. "It appears nothing has been taken, but it has been tampered with, though it was a professional job. Only a few things are slightly out of place, and I might not have noticed the slight difference if I hadn't been looking for it." "What do you think it means? What do you think he is after?" I eased closer to the desk, drawn by my curiosity. I probably shouldn't be questioning the Lord about his suspicions. It wasn't my place. But it seemed that even after several weeks of servitude, I still hadn't gotten used to minding my place like a proper servant.
It could be he is just after information on my future votes in Parliament.
Lord Warnwick frowned as he straightened the papers on his desk.
Or he is up to something more sinister. I don't sense any magical residue, so I can't conclude his involvement with magic or not. And it would be premature to assume his involvement in my curse.
Though it would be somewhat of a coincidence if he wasn't. How many enemies could Lord Warnwick have? In this section of the country, support for the Navy ran fairly high due to the proximity to Portsmouth. Still, with everything happening in France, the bloodshed of their revolution still fresh in everyone's minds, most people supported the Navy's efforts to keep Napoleon on his side of the Channel.
He will bear watching.
Lord Warnwick shut a drawer on his desk. I will do my best, where I can. I glanced over the now perfectly straightened desk. What sort of information might Mr. Doyle have been looking for? And what sort of nefarious activity was he involved in? Governmental corruption or treason? I hope you enjoyed listening to Torn Curtains, Part 1 by Tara Grayce, narrated by Karyne Norton. If you want to read more by Tara, go to taragrayce.com, where you can sign up for her newsletter and snag your own ebook copy of Torn Curtains. But you'll also get access to 2 other novellas that introduce you to her expansive worlds and series. I'll have a direct link in the show notes. This month, we are running a giveaway with 4 Romantasy audiobooks and a 3-month Audible subscription. If you're enjoying Tara's story, you should know that one of the books included in the giveaway is a box set of 3 of her audiobooks. We also have a box set by Melanie Sellier, the newest novel by Sarah Ella, and an old favorite of mine by Constance Lopez. So if you want a chance to win, go to findingfantasyreads.com/giveaway to enter. The direct link is in the show notes. Thank you all for listening, and happy reading.